And then I think, there's a lot of things that, I was exposed to early on that made an impact. Not all of them were good. And I think that's one of the things that I always encourage people is like people focus so much, oh, I had a bad experience, so I'm going to leave, or I had a bad experience. And I think I've learned more from situations that were not positive, where, it really taught me what not to do. But at the same time, that resilience of just because something doesn't go well, it doesn't mean that you have to leave.
Hi, everyone, and thank you for listening. I'm your host, Kerrie Jordan. Welcome to our show where we hear from the leaders who are driving the future of manufacturing and supply chain industries. Today, I'm speaking with Lisa Pope, board member, executive, and digital transformation leader. After a very successful, award-winning 40-year career in software technology, she has just retired. She most recently served as the president and chief revenue officer at Epicor, a global over $1 billion fast-growing business technology company. Today, she serves on the board of two innovative software companies, and previously she's held critical leadership roles at Infor, QAD, Oracle, and NCR Corporation. I'm so honored to speak with Lisa today, and I'm excited to ask her about her journey in software, career advice, and the future of technology. She's a mentor, a colleague, and a dear friend, but I'm just one of so many who have been lucky to know her and to work with her and to be inspired by her fearless leadership and insight. Lisa, welcome, and thank you for joining the show.
Thanks. I'm super excited, Carrie. It's great to get to see you again and excited to share some of my past experiences and certainly talk about the future as well.
Wonderful. Let's get right to it. So, you've had such an impressive career. Could you share your journey and what originally brought you to the tech industry?
Well, I would say I think I got into tech sort of by accident. I had graduated with a business and communications degree from this college called UC Santa Barbara, which was absolutely incredibly great. And I think my options when I got out of there in terms of companies, you pretty much went to work for a big six accounting firm, got into finance, worked for a bank. And after doing those interviews and looking at those offers, it just didn't seem something that I would enjoy. And so a little company, software company based up in the Bay Area called Triad Systems came to campus to interview, and I had the opportunity to go through that. Ended up getting the job and basically started off as a pre-sales and customer education rep for them. So went through some very crazy industry training, 2 months, and then actually had to go work in a number of their customers, including some very large Ace hardware stores based out in Southern California. And that really, I think, taught me a lot about the customer perspective, and having to be seen as an expert on site, while the software is being used, and really work with clients to make sure they were getting the benefit and, the efficiency that they wanted. So interesting enough, that Triad Systems obviously was bought by Epicor. So I started my career and ended my career basically at the same company. So full circle for sure. But I think, that early experience working with clients and customers sort of drove my whole career. Also, the industry focus that Triad had. So NCR recruited me soon after that to come in and work on their distribution industry. And, back then hardware and software went together. So I was the software specialist inside of a hardware company and basically did, again, all of the demonstrations, and then eventually realized that I was pretty good at this and maybe I should consider going into sales. So NCR is really where I started my sales career selling software. I covered a lot of large accounts in Southern California, and getting back to sort of that customer focus, Oracle reached out and asked me to come work for them because one of my existing customers told them to hire me. So I really wasn't sure I wanted to work for Oracle. They had sort of, a unique relationship and reputation, I think, in the industry, growing very fast and a very fast-paced environment. But I was going to keep some of my large clients that I already knew, and it was an opportunity for me. And it ended up being very good. I was there almost 8 years, promoted 6 times, and really ended up as a vice president for them in the applications business, and really learned a lot about again, working with very strategic clients and then having to navigate Oracle at the executive level, at the product level, and really try to bring all of those things together. QED was next up, and that was a great opportunity for me, mainly because I had a chance to be on the executive team. So that was critical to me in my career journey, was not to be pigeonholed just in sales. And so I learned about product and, services, and also got a lot of global experience, visiting over 15 countries and also spending quite a bit of time in China. Our CEO at the time felt very important. If we were selling into manufacturers, we had to understand supply chain. We needed to go to China, experience, meet with the government, meet with clients, and really understand the dynamics of having plants and materials coming from China. So again, just a great learning experience. And then from there, Infor hired me to run their cloud business right when they were launching the cloud suites. Critical time as many customers were considering moving to the cloud or purchasing cloud for the first time. And then clearly, Epicor recruited me based on a lot of the experience I'd had at Oracle QAD and Infor. And it's been an incredible 8-year journey. I'm really proud of the success the company's had. I love the team and the people, and just have had some incredible client experiences. So I said earlier, full circle from Triad Systems to Epicor, and each of those moves, although it can be difficult and risky sometimes to change jobs, each of those sort of was for the right reason and certainly helped me take on sort of that next level of engagement and learning. So it's been fun, but definitely by accident. Software was not really well known back then. You went to work for a big hardware company. That's sort of the way things worked. I remember my dad, very confused as to why I would take this kind of job or role, because it just was something back then that was a little bit, so you couldn't touch it, feel it, right? It's intellectual property. How do you sell that? Just an interesting dynamic in terms of how far we've come.
That's so interesting. It sounds like your early intuition really served you well, set you on this trajectory. And as you said, full circle, what an interesting journey. Okay, so now you've recently retired from your role as president and CRO, but really you just seem to be taking on new and different challenges. So you're serving on the board of a few growing companies. How did you decide to join these organizations? And then what else is next for you?
Yeah, I think it's a great question, because I think just like looking at a job opportunity, you've got to feel you can make a difference. So the number one thing I look for is, how do my skills match up with where that company is and what they need? I don't want to be a board member that just goes to a meeting, once a quarter. And actually, our board members at Epicor really helped me crystallize and define the kind of board member that I wanted to be. We have one board member, Mitch Williams, who has been an executive in the distribution industry and really helped us develop our influencer program, and also really made a big difference with Frank's business and really going into distribution at that enterprise level. And so I realized early on that I wanted to be that kind of board member where I could get engaged and involved. I also think you've got to believe in the company and the product. So that's important to me. I've asked all the companies that I talk to if I can see the product. I think that shocks them a little bit that I want to demo. But at the end of the day, the product matters, and I've been a very product focused executive. It's critical to me, and so that was critical. And then I think the third thing is the team. So the executive team. I can't say enough about the importance of having the right balance of executives, strengths and weaknesses that help balance each other out. Again, a great strength of Epicor would be by far the best executive team I've ever had the opportunity to work with and for. But I feel that knowing those executives and getting to understand if those are the type of people that I want to be engaged in, helping them to continue to grow the business is crucial for me. So yeah, the two boards have been great. One's public and one's private equity owned. I am doing some other advisory work. A lot of, companies right now are considering to go either up for sale for private equity. So many ownership changes happening, or considering to go public. And so whether it's helping them assess if that company makes sense for them, or maybe helping some of them recruit the right executives, just, leveraging my network. There's been a few opportunities like that. So I'm retiring as a software executive operator, and running the day-to-day business, but definitely not retiring from the industry, and definitely am staying involved in sort of more the strategic advisory role, which, is just a perfect place to be at this point.
So much more to come. Well, looking back on your career, what have been some achievements that you're most proud of?
I think probably the most would be around the mentorship of my teams. It's interesting when I was early on in my career moving into leadership, it was very competitive. And so it was not, you didn't really see a lot of mentors. It was almost everyone, was sort of always looking over their shoulder and, well, who's going to get that job and who's going to take that and how's that going to change things? And so the environment was much tougher in terms of taking a risk and taking that next step. So I think that's actually encouraged me to view that very differently with my teams and my colleagues. And so if I look back, from the very early days and seeing how many people that worked for me or with me that I've helped get to that next level and become a vice president or a president, or even just mentoring them personally through a time of, do I stop working? I've got another child or a sick parent, or how do I navigate politics inside of a company? All of those things, the mentorship and sort of helping the teams continue to do well, it has probably been my number one accomplishment. And then I think the second thing would be client success, right? I believe strongly in what I do for my customers. And so even when I worked for a company that may not be as client centric, that didn't mean I couldn't be. And so I find that passion for fixing customer issues, regardless of what level you're at. Yes, it's easy for me to do it as president. I had a lot of power, but even when I was a sales rep, whether it was at Oracle or NCR, I was still fixing client issues and taking things personally and getting stuff resolved for them. And I think I've had so many customers reach out that saw my announcement on LinkedIn. Again, some from 20 years ago, just thanking me for something that I had done for them. So I think that client success and taking things personally has been great. And then finally, and this is probably not as critical, but I don't think I realized the impact that I've had on women. So, I mean, I'm very blessed to have been able to work in this industry, rise to the level of president, billion-dollar software company. There is just not a lot of women that get the opportunity to do that. And I think, that's not because companies are not embracing it. I think it's just that women have a harder time early in their career struggling and balancing. And certainly when I started working, that was back when women had to wear a suit skirt and nylons and high heels, even if it was 20 degrees and you were pregnant, like the rules were just very different and you had to be in the office 5 days a week. And so when I think about how far we've moved in terms of allowing people to have more balance. And at each company I've been at, certainly I've encouraged more flexibility and understanding, and then also just knowing that I've gone through things too. People were more open to coming to me and talking to me about challenges they were having. And so I just saw a lot of women leave the workspace too early for the wrong reasons, right? Everybody has that decision, and but for the wrong reasons. And so I'm really excited to see how much it's changed. I've got two daughter-in-laws now that are both working professionals, and to see the flexibility they have and the time that they can take off and not having to be in the office all 5 days. And, it makes them a more strategic thinker at work. I think they're more productive. They're able to get things done. And that balance, I think, is critical for both men and women. But I'd be remiss if I didn't comment on the fact that, people do see me as a change agent and for having furthered the cause, for a lot of women that were struggling back then to work. So,
Lisa, just the way you answered that question, I think speaks volumes to the type of leader that you are. Because when I asked about your achievements, you right away pointed to the achievements of so many others that you helped to facilitate, which I think is so inspiring. And thank you. I think, those who have worked with you, we can absolutely vouch for everything that you had just shared there. So if I could ask you kind of along those lines, what are some moments that might not be on your LinkedIn profile or on your resume that had impacted your trajectory?
Early on, just growing up, my dad worked for General Motors. We were in the automotive industry. And so And he was transferred quite a few times as he kept getting promoted and moving to new regions. That was sort of their mode. And I think for me that had a big impact on my life. A lot of people don't, they view that like, oh, I grew up in the same town my whole life. And, we moved quite a bit all over the United States. And I think for me, extremely helpful in that, when I was asked to take on a new job or a new territory or, fly to the East Coast or do this, for me, it was like, well, I used to live there or I understood it, So I think that geographical challenge early on and me getting that exposure to a lot of different people across the US. There's very different ways to do business in New York City than there is in that small town in Texas, right? And if you approach it the same way, you're not always going to have the same results. So I think that is certainly one thing that I think has definitely impacted me in a very positive way and helped me understand the differences between people and culture, right? I think at the end of the day, that's critical as we go through our journeys in the sales. And then I think, there's a lot of things that, I was exposed to early on that made an impact. Not all of them were good. And I think that's one of the things that I always encourage people is like, people focus so much, oh, I had a bad experience, so I'm going to leave, or I had a bad experience. And I think I've learned more from situations that were not positive, where, it really taught me what not to do. But at the same time, that resilience of just because something doesn't go well, it doesn't mean that you have to leave, right? So that's probably my other, big lesson learned is, if you're ready to leave a company, you take the time to really think through it and you make a decision. You don't do it because you got a new boss or you had a bad quarter, right? Those aren't reasons to leave a company or, a career. You really give it some thought in terms of where would I want to go? What are the companies I would like to work for? Why would I be leaving and how will it be better? And certainly in my hiring now and all the people that I've recruited, you start to see so many candidates that did 2 years here and 1 year there and and you're like, why, those aren't the people that I'm looking to hire, right? I want consistency. I want to build a team. I want people that are going to stay here and feel they can build their career here. And so I think, that those learning experiences and that resiliency to say things aren't great now, but this is what I need to do to try to improve things here. And then if I am going to leave, be thoughtful about it.
That's great advice for when you do encounter a tough challenge.
Mhm.
How do you navigate that decision process and finding your path forward? I mean, I love that you said like, no, let's think through it. Don't be irrational and, act very quickly. How do you recommend navigating that thought process of really analyzing your situation and how do you move forward?
Yeah, I think for me, each time I left a company, I sort of had a vision of like, where was I and what else was I going to learn here? And so I had
Mhm.
mentioned Oracle, I rose very high up on the sales side, but they were all functional. So there was no way that I would learn services or, any of the other departments because that's how the company was run. So I made a conscious decision to think through, I want to be able to go broader. And to go broader, I'm probably going to have to work at a smaller company where I could make a bigger impact cross functionally. And so, that's a decision to move from a really big brand name to a company that was much smaller, more of a family run business, even though they was public at a time. I think, thinking through what it is where you're trying to go. I also think it's always important to ask your leadership about what opportunities are there for you and don't assume that they won't give it to you either, right? So I have successfully done that where I've said, hey, in addition to this role, I would like to get experience here. How could that happen and would that be possible? So I think advocating for yourself and feeling confident about, where you're going and what you're doing. The other thing is when someone does reach out with an amazing company and offer, take the time. Epicor, it took me a year to make the decision to go to Epicor. And it's not because I didn't. It's just that I felt like I had to finish what I had started it in for. And I also felt Epicor was in the midst of a sale. And I was like, I would rather start with the new leadership in place and feel confident that, we're in growth mode versus a big transition period. And that was a very smart decision. I think a lot of people would have just rushed at it and said, this is a great opportunity, take it. And I was like, it's the timing. If they want me now, they'll want me later was my, thought process. But early in my career, it can be very easy to think if I don't take this now, I won't ever have the chance. So I
Mhm.
think being your own advocate, being thoughtful about it, and then, I've never left for money. I mean, that sounds crazy, but I left for the next step or the opportunity. But I think if it's just about chasing a dollar, like I said, those are the resumes I see where you can tell they're switching every few years because they're not thinking through, what the impact they want to make and where do they want to make it. And I have friends, frankly, that have been at one company their entire career. And it's phenomenal, right? If you can find that and you continue to advance, or if you're just very good at what you do and you're the subject matter expert and that's what you want to stay doing. So I don't think everybody has to consider always moving up the ladder. I've talked to a lot of people that I work with about it's okay to move over on the ladder. And I kind of view that when I went to QAD, I didn't want to climb that Oracle ladder. I wanted to move over, get some additional experience, and really broaden my scope before I tried to really move up again. And that was a great time for me to really reflect on what I wanted, both work, family, all of those things. And so I think, that's an important thing is sometimes getting broader experience is more important than getting to the next level.
Yeah, that's great advice, especially for people who are earlier in their career to be conscious of the number of moves that you make, to really evaluate it before you make that move. Timing is important. Lateral moves expand your experience. But for those who maybe are closer to retirement, I mean, most of us hope to retire successfully one day, right? To look back with pride at our careers. What advice would you give to those, who are maybe early in their career to set themselves up for success later? And then maybe for those who are closer to retirement now, what would you suggest?
I think the first thing, for people just wanting to really broaden their career and make sure I always say, have a career, not a year, right? Too many people sometimes focus on just making the year. And so I think that, one of the most important things is to try to find a mentor, somebody that will help you, that you can speak to about this. Traditionally, not your boss, someone that maybe works with you or maybe was your boss. And then when you leave, they help mentor you because I think there are a lot of decisions you have to make in your career, and I think having somebody that knows you, that you have a strong relationship with, that can guide you not just for work but also personally. I think that's critical, and I love the fact now there are so many mentoring organizations out there. Women at Work, etc. All sorts of third-party companies that do that as well. So I think that's critical. Second is I think developing a community, your community and your network, if you will. And that should not just be your colleagues at work or thinking of LinkedIn. It's everything from your communities around your neighborhood, your church, where you might volunteer. I'm amazed at how many times someone that I know through church or through another organization is trying to maybe hire somebody that I know or they know. And so having that network and knowing that you've got a lot of different people that know you and think highly of you, I think cannot be underestimated. So don't silo yourself to just be, I've got my little, work group. Really make an effort to network across geographies and across industries where possible. I think those are probably, the two most important things for people younger in career. And then I think the third thing or the second question you asked about what you can do if you're thinking about retiring, is different. I think I have found most people have this vague idea of when they're going to retire, and it either involves an age or a dollar in their bank account, right? So they're like, when I hit this age or when I hit this amount of money, I'm retiring. And I think the reality is, from what I've seen, not just with myself, but also other people that have gone through that, it's not the case. So it's usually something else that sort of, is the catalyst. And so knowing that and knowing that if you have this age of 68 and then all of a sudden you decide to do it at 60, I think the most important thing you need to do is to really think about a plan. And for me, like I said, I knew retirement wasn't going to be the end of me staying involved in the industry. So I knew I was going to continue to do something. So understanding what does that look like? Are you going to continue to work in some fashion and factoring that in? Obviously, having a financial plan is really critical. Everybody knows that. I think as you get near to retirement, it's different things. It's things like benefits, right? So, if, thinking about if your spouse is still working, how are benefits going to be handled? Because honestly, that is the biggest, I think, challenge for a lot of people is figuring out that piece of the retirement equation. And then I think as it gets closer, literally having a plan. People have asked me, they're like, well, what did you do the first week? And I said, well, it's not like I woke up every day and said, what am I going to do today? Because if you're a business person and you've been working, I think you just naturally schedule and plan. So I had that advice from someone that I respect very highly. And so I did sort of take a full year plan. We planned all our travel. So we knew exactly when we were going and where. I already have 2 wonderful ski trips done to Vail and Deer Valley. So you can see where my priorities were. But then factoring in all your kids' events or things that you had to go to. And then I layered in my board work and some of the advisory work. And then you can clearly see sort of how much time you have. And then there are projects, of course, that you want to take on, whether it's redoing a kitchen or remodeling, and all that stuff sort of comes into play. But I think, at the end of the day, my advice to people that are in that spot is don't wait till a few years before thinking it, because I've seen a lot of people for whatever reason, and it could be, I don't want to say forced retirement, but in some cases, their job situation may change and they may find themselves unable to get the kind of job they want. So I think the earlier you can start sort of thinking through that, the better. But yeah, it's a great place to be at this point in my career, and still wake up at the same time. I still do my same morning workout. Yesterday I spent, I don't know, probably 4 hours getting ready for a board deck and an advisory call, and then I was able to take some time for myself. So it certainly isn't laying on the beach every day, right?
Yeah, gosh, I'm so glad you shared that with us. And I'm so glad too that you were able to get that time to go on your trips, to go skiing. It's wonderful. And like I said earlier, like, yeah, it doesn't sound like you've really slowed down.
On the trip thing, I think one of the critical things is as I probably over the last 10 years, I got a lot better about taking time off.
Yeah.
And so that's a big piece of this is I hate to hear the people that wait to retire to take all their trips and do all these great things and then find out that, someone's sick or, they need a knee replacement, so they can't hike or ski anymore. Whatever it is, I think starting to find that and making sure you're incorporating that in 10 to 15 years ahead of time. We've been doing weekly ski trips or weekly annual ski trips, twice a year for as long as I can remember. My parents did that with me, and now I'm able to do that. And we took our grandson for the first time. So that passion for having, making sure you have those things sort of in place and routine, I think is critical. And I think, again, going back to my earlier comments, you're able to take time off now without being critiqued. You're able to take time off and actually not answer your cell phone. And so, the environment we have now, I think, is more conducive to some type of balance. And so there will always be work there. So, that's an important part of this journey too, is making sure that you do get your downtime.
Like you said, balance. There has to be balance. That's great. Okay, well, if we could pivot on this show, we love to explore technologies and especially those that are driving the future of industry. And I know that this is your passion as well. So let's go ahead and shift our focus there. What in technology are you excited about and why?
Well, I think the number one thing in the industry right now, and it's interesting for me to be leaving sort of Epicor at this point, because I really do feel we're at like what I would call a big third wave of EOP, and that it's AI, right? It's what's going to happen with this technology and how is that going to drive customers reevaluating who is running their systems today, and also where's it going to take us? So I'm excited and also a little concerned. I think, like many people, like getting the wrong answer is never something someone wants, right? So if we're relying on something and we're getting, wrong information, it could really set us back significantly. But, it's funny. The first wave that I remember in my career, which was amazing, was year 2000. And some people on this call will probably be too young to remember that. But in sales, it was awesome because everybody had to switch computers pretty
Yes.
much or do massive changes. And so we were in a cycle of just ERP evaluation, ERP after another, one after another, and significant amount of new opportunity change. Client server came into fashion, right? There was a lot, the applications look so much better than the old green screens, right? It was this whole wave of many customers changing. Very good for customers as well, not just because of the year 2000, but they got improved technology. They had more users, I think, being able to touch the systems and leverage the systems. So it was all very positive. And then, later on, we saw sort of the cloud, computer wave happen, right? And certainly very similarly, so many clients then making decisions. Do I switch vendors? I need to get to the cloud. How quickly can I get to the cloud? Who's the right vendor to get to the cloud? All those things. So we've had this tremendous wave of innovation and things as customers have embraced that technology and realized it was better for remote workers and better for security and compliance and made them more efficient and allowed them to really focus on their value add as manufacturers or distributors. And so I think that's been just a huge productivity improvement for our clients. And obviously, some customers have not made that decision yet and may still be on premise, but we know the industry is going there. And so now you have this, what I think is sort of this next wave of technology around AI. And I think what's different here is that customers that are in the cloud and maybe went there 7 or 8 years ago and are, running efficiently now have to really say, okay, is my software provider taking me to that next level? Are they innovating and are they embracing AI? And am I going to get the benefit of that? Because I think we'll be in a situation where some people will get left behind. So I think it's exciting to me because it's going to drive change. We're going to have customers just like we did for cloud that are going to be early adopters that are going to say, I'm all in, I'm going in. Let's work on some use cases. And we'll have other customers that are going to be nervous and concerned and maybe take a wait and see approach. But I think ERP vendors and providers have to take this very seriously because I think ultimately, if that's the backbone of your company, AI has to be integrated with it. It can't be something you sort of stick on top. I feel like that's going to cause multiple issues. And if you've got lots of different systems in your company and you're using individual AI products for each of them, again, I think that you could end up with very different types of answers to potentially similar questions. So, like I said, I'm excited about it. I think it is going to be a big wave. I think there'll be companies that really rise to the occasion and software providers that really don't embrace it and sort of fail. And we'll probably see a similar situation with customer success, right? Some early adopters really embracing it and changing the landscape of their competitors. So it's exciting.
Yeah, to your point, Lisa, I think a lot of people that I speak with are, I'd say, cautiously optimistic. They're excited about the future of AI, but there are some potential pitfalls as to how you actually go about adopting AI and whether or not you choose like a multiple different AI or an integrated approach where you have a single provider as part of your ERP. And that is, of course, the way in which we are suggesting those organizations to adopt AI in order to avoid, the hallucinations that could potentially occur with generative AI, for example. So you had mentioned that you had been with Epicor for 8 years. What has changed about the organization since you started?
I think first of all, just an incredible journey on the product side. And again, as a software company, that needs to be the focus, right? Our head of product and now president, Vaibhav Bora, has done a phenomenal job ensuring that the product continues to move forward and technologies like AI are top of mind. And I think that's critical. When I got here, our products were very good for the industries they served. We did not have a lot of the capabilities that we have today cross-platform. So, it was very different development teams, very different architectures. And so when I think about how far the products come, not just in the cloud, but in all the additional capabilities that we have through so many of the acquisitions we've done, we've really turned from just a industry product to really a full suite of products across make, move, and sell. And so, I think Epicor's products are second to none. I really believe that. If you're in one of our industries, I can't imagine any company not considering Epicor just based on where the products are and the direction and the focus we have. As I said, with Bob at the helm, I think it's been phenomenal. I think the second thing that's been exciting to me is the shift to focus on the customer. And I think Epicor always, did a very good job. We've always had customer account managers, we've always had industry expertise. And so I think that's been great because we knew how our customers worked and we were able to communicate on that level. But I think our relationship was very much like, here's the software, we'll implement it, and then call us if you need us, right? So it was a little bit more of a reactive relationship when I got here. And I think obviously moving to the cloud changed that dynamic for many clients because now, in effect, we are running their business. So there has to be a deeper partnership and a deeper trust. But I saw us take on a lot more interest in collaborating with clients. So whether it was our industry advisory boards, right? Kerrie, I know you and I worked on the Executive Cloud Council, ensuring that we got customer feedback about cloud performance and direction. And then I just think about the work we've done in terms of spending time with our clients after they go live with Sam Montana and the value engineering team and looking to ensure they're using the software. And if not, using it effectively, then how could we help do that? And what could they do differently to get that productivity? So I think the client experience and our commitment to customers has never been stronger. And there's always growing pains in that. I mean, we've had some challenges, early on in the cloud days for sure with performance and other things. And I think our relationships with clients, they trusted us to resolve it and fix it. And we have. And so I think the customer journey for me has been, super exciting. And then finally, and this is critical, they're putting a lot of trust in us to provide for them. And so our performance matters. So again, when I joined Epicor 8 years ago, we were working on getting the cost structure in line. The company had not really grown. That was one of the reasons, I was sort of hired was to come in and help start to drive the business and increase revenue. But, that involved bringing teams together. It's not like you just snap your fingers and that happens. So you look over the course of the last 8 years and to see a company growing double-digit revenues while maintaining very healthy margin and EBITDA, which is critical in order for us to invest in AI. So the performance of the company matters. Our customers are getting bigger, which is awesome. We're growing, they're growing. And so as they get larger, they need to know that Epicor is going to be there, strong financial performance, strong executive team, a strong board, all those things matter to our clients. And so, it comes back to sort of product, people, and performance. And I think it's been an incredible shift. So really, really excited to see Epicor at this stage. And frankly, probably one of the reasons why my decision to leave was easier because I felt like the company is in great strength, right? And that's the ideal time to consider leaving, knowing that you've got the team in place to sort of take it to the next level.
And how about the customers? How have they changed over this time?
Our customers have gotten larger,
Yeah.
right? Because they've been acquiring and I think more complex, right? So, many of our customers, they've acquired companies a little outside their core, right? We've talked about distrifactoring and other things like that, but they may be acquiring companies in their supply chain. So they're also learning and taking on, opportunities that may be outside a little bit of their comfort zone and then coming to us and asking for our assistance. So I think that's good. I think they are also, they are very educated today. And so there is no reacting to things anymore. I think our customers are extremely proactive. They're talking to us about things, way in advance. I was excited to see how many of Epicor's clients wanted to be involved in some of the early adopters for AI, for example. I think that shows that, our clients are also wanting to stay ahead of the curve. So I think they're more competitive in a good way. I definitely think, their complexity has increased, which is good. And I think they are excited about the fact that Epicor wants a more collaborative relationship versus maybe, how it was 10 years ago.
And to your point, customers have been growing just as Epicor has been growing. What other changes have you seen within the industry as a whole, especially like manufacturing and distribution, building supply, automotive and retail, those that Epicor serves?
I think the number one thing is the cross pollination of those industries,
Yeah.
right? And I think understanding the supply chain and your customers, and then, you know, taking on different pieces of business. We've seen a lot of customers realizing that their customers want them, for example, maybe to provide higher levels of service. And so, they're also very focused on what their customers want. And I think that's one of the things that's great because as Epicor shares our journey around customer experience, many customers also asked us to share that with them because they're looking to have also a very unique relationship with their clients. I think the other second thing I've seen, which has been very unusual the last 3 to 4 years, is the amount of consolidation in ownership. So larger companies getting larger, a lot of acquisitions, and private equity obviously moving into some of our industries, which can be a very good thing. I mean, obviously, we've been owned by private equity, and it does give you an opportunity, to continue to grow outside of the scrutiny, maybe of a public market. So I think us understanding that and understand how ownership changes a relationship and also financial metrics. If you're public, consistency is the number one thing that matters. If you're owned by private equity, you have a longer roadmap, if you will, on some of those financial returns, but there is more scrutiny on things. So I think our customers are going through some of that. Our understanding of that is critical. And then I think for Epicor, one of the things that's been important is, we've scaled up into being able to run very large clients, and that's critical because, as I said, as consolidation happens, our customers may be getting acquired by a much larger client. And we want to ensure that no matter how large you are, you can start with Epicor, grow with Epicor, and stay with Epicor, right? So those are probably the two biggest things that I've seen in terms of just cross pollination across our core verticals, and then sort of this industry consolidation and ownership changes that have been good. I think, change is good. It's just making sure we understand and stay on track.
So, could we talk a little bit about positioning an organization for long-term success? Because, of course, as president for so many years at Epicor, you did this at Epicor, and then as you've worked with so many business leaders throughout your career, what advice do you give to them to best position an organization for long-term success?
I mean, I think honestly, the number one thing is to be client centric at all costs.
Yeah.
I think if you understand your customers and you have relationships with your customers and are listening to them, at the end of the day, then your plan for success is tied to theirs. And so, I think too many software companies can get overly excited just about product. And as important as product is, product without the customer feedback focus, and especially on the delivery side, making sure the products work and are simple and easy, and all those things are so critical. I also think that has to be at the CEO, the executive team, and at the board level. They need to be engaged with the customers just as much. I mentioned our board members. They come to our conferences. I think that's wonderful. Because they talk to clients. They talk to our customers. They ask them about their experiences, and then we hear about that back, at the board meeting. So I think having an executive team that spends a significant time talking about customers, whether it's a customer escalation or an acquisition a customer's making, and how can we facilitate or help make something easier for them. Every meeting should start and end with a discussion around clients. And I think if that's what our customers are doing with theirs, and Epicor continues to do that, then I think, that's ultimately how you're going to gauge your success.
Excellent advice. I mean, I think that's great guidance for any organization, any leader. Well, as we wrap, Lisa, was there any final thoughts that you wanted to share?
Honestly, it's great to get an opportunity to do this and get a chance to speak with you. And as I said, I think any career that you look at over this amount of time, there's things you look back on and you're like strengths, weaknesses, good opportunities, maybe opportunities that did not work out as well. But holistically, each of the moves that I sort of made and some of the tough things that I dealt with, especially early on in my career, they all sort of make sense now. So I think that's the one thing is sometimes if you're stuck in a situation right now that isn't 100% positive, try to give yourself a little bit of break and a little time because in the scheme of things, that experience can certainly pay off long term in terms of your resiliency, but also knowing what not to do. I think that's just as important as doing everything perfect.
Well, this has been such a wonderful conversation. It's been such a pleasure to learn from your experience. For anyone who wants to maybe learn more about you or to connect with you, where would you direct them?
Yeah, definitely on LinkedIn. You can get me on LinkedIn. I'm staying very active and enjoying. I watched Arturo's AI podcast the other day.
Yes.
I'd like to, especially around AI, I'm still fascinated. So I'm really trying to dive in and learn as much as I can around what's happening with it. So yeah, I'm very active still on LinkedIn and continue to do so. So that's probably the easiest way. And my personal email is on that as well.
Wonderful. Thank you so much, Lisa. We will link to that in the show notes. And you mentioned Arturo's webinar. So Arturo Bozzolino, the Epicor Chief Innovation Officer, recently did a webinar about AI in the future. So we'll link that as well. Lisa, this has been wonderful. Thank you so much.
You're so welcome. Great to see you, Kerrie.
Great to see you. All right. That was Lisa Pope, board member, executive, and digital transformation leader. And to everyone listening, thank you for being a part of the future of manufacturing.